Okay, so today we're going to talk about MultiLoader and the madness that comes with supporting multiple mod loaders in one project. So to begin with, just who we are. That's Darkax, I'm Jared. Between us we have quite a few mods and quite a few downloads combined. So we've been in the game for quite a while and we know what's going on with modding basically.
So, just to say hi, I'm Darkax, and I work on quite a few mods, including additional banners, dark paintings, dark utilities, way too many other mods.
And I'm Jared, working Craftweaker, Clumps and controlling. The mods used are always in the mod packs, but if you ask a player, they won't know what they do. And another 63 other random mods. So MultiLoader, it's basically just a bunch of Gradle glue. We took all the quote-unquote official tools for the job, so we're using Forge Gradle, Fabric Loom, and Vanilla Gradle, which isn't official, but it just focuses on vanilla. There's no extra stuff, doesn't even re-obfuscate your code. Just vanilla Gradle, vanilla code, made by the Sponge team. It is very nice.
I think you might have forgot a bit on the
Yeah,
last
sorry,
slide.
yeah. So we made it because we wanted support multiple loads with our mods, but there's like over 150 between us. There's just not enough time in the day to support all of those. I mean, what, you port by the time you finish porting your mods, Fabric has a new version because there's a new snapshot and like just in that porting loop. And with how quickly Minecraft's updating nowadays, I mean 6 months-ish per version, like just wasn't realistic to support individual ports of each mod. So yeah, that's how we made it.
Okay, so some of the pros of using MultiLoader is that it's really easy to support multiple loaders with a single code base. So like Jared was saying, we often found that we were getting into port loops where by the time we were finally ready to start making new stuff or adding new features, a new Minecraft version would be out, or like a new Forge release build, or even like Quilt coming out is a big thing for us because it means there's another thing we have to support. But some of the downsides of using multi-loader is that you have platform-specific abstractions. So we'll talk a bit more about that on, I think, the next slide. Um, but another issue that we ran into was pre-existing bugs with IDE integration. So, for example, for Forge mods, you have to use a tool called Forge Gradle, and it turns out there was a lot of underlying bugs with it, especially with using Eclipse, where like paths wouldn't be right when you set up the development environment. And even Loom had a few bugs where it would generate like the environmental working directory, the run folder in the root project instead of the main one. So getting multi-loader out before we really went public with it, we had to talk with a lot of with like the Loom people and Forge people to get a few bugs fixed. And there's still a few that make it a bit challenging to use with Eclipse, but if you use IntelliJ, it works pretty much perfectly.
Yeah, just to clarify on a few things, the bugs aren't primarily Forge Gradle or Fabric Loom. Like the biggest bug with that we ran into with Eclipse is just their build ship plugin that all Gradle things go through. it doesn't process resources when you run the game. So when you have to copy the files from the common source set to the Fabric or Forge source set, bit of an issue when Eclipse decides, let's not do that. And I think the issue for it is like 7 years old or something. It doesn't really seem like they have big plans for it. So one of the main things that really allowed MultiLoader to be a thing is the usage of mod maps. Just a single mapping for all versions, for all mod loaders. Just makes it super easy. You don't need to worry about new identifier, new resource location. Just wherever Mojang decides, that's what you use. With that though, there are some caveats. You don't have parameter names, so if you've ever had to use, I think it's GUI component .blitz, you're gonna run into quite a few issues figuring out what all of those parameters are. But thankfully there are projects like Parchment MC, which is a community project that its purpose is to map the parameter names. So see how it's used, give it a mapping, and yeah, currently it's supported by everything but Vanilla Gradle right now. So it's getting there, but not there just yet. There's also some unique naming choices that Mojang decided to use. Some of the things with that is there was an absorption of effect. Like there's a typo in the effect class name that most likely wouldn't have happened in MCP names, yarn names, any other community names because they could just fix it. But here you have to wait for Mojang to realize and fix it. I think they eventually did. There's also licensing issues with it. Mojang haven't given it the best license. It's a bit vague in some places. But in our personal opinions, if Mojang wanted to take modding down, doing it via mappings would not be the quickest way to do that. So it's like, sure, it's an attack vector for them to take it down, but it's maybe one of the weakest attack vectors to take it down. So we aren't really concerned with the licensing. And then there's obviously the issue of having to rewrite your code from other mappings. There were tools, I don't know the Gradle command for it, but Forge Gradle had a command that would update your code to mod maps, and in theory everything works. And I personally never used that tool because you now work in different mappings. You can't write code in old mappings and run that command. You need to know those mappings. You need to know what screen is now named to, and all of those. So, but it is a pain point of if you're writing a Fabric mod and it's in yarn names, there is a bit of a step to convert to mod maps and get used to those mod maps going forward.
So basically, the how MultiLoader actually works is using MoVmaps allows us to have a common code module. So most of your mod code would go in common. Like if you're adding a block or an item to the game, or sending a message in chat, there's no MultiLoader specific code being used there. The only part, the specific part to MultiLoader is how you actually register it with the game. And so you put all of the majority of your mod code in common, and then you have platform-specific modules like Fabric, Forge, and now Quilt. And the platform-specific module is partly it's a bootstrap, so it like tells the game how to load your common module, and then sometimes there'll be downcalling and upcalling between the common and platform-specific module. So a common example is you might want to check like if another mod is loaded, and Fabric, Forge, and Quilt each have different ways to check if another mod is loaded by mod ID. So the platform-specific modules will have code that's unique to that platform.
So there are quite a few challenges when developing a MultiLoader mod. Like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. You do have to deal with the hierarchy changes of classes. So while it's not an issue in 1.19, in previous versions, Forge classes such as, I believe, Atom, maybe, now extend our Forge registry entry. So in some cases, if you want to register stuff, you need to add somehow get that extension onto your class in common, which is pretty annoying. It's like one way I worked that out in my recipe serializers, I think was to basically make the whole class an interface. And thankfully Java has soft overrides. That's what I'm going to call them. I don't know their actual name. Where if a if an interface has the same header, has a method with the same header. So void do thing with no params. It can override a method in another parent of a class. If you have class item extends forge item, implements my custom item. My custom item can override methods from forge item, even if it's in a different project completely. Then there's also different API implementations. So, for example, when using the game test system, Forge decides to load MBT files, whereas Fabric decides to load SMBT files. So you have to figure out a solution for that. There's also an issue where it doesn't affect most mods, but for my use case, Forge would collect the events at like the start of the world, whereas Fabric would collect them on mod construct, basically. So that was a bit of an issue where I needed to actually collect my events, my game tests at the right time. So there's a lot of banging your head, messaging your friends saying, I hate Forge, I hate Fabric, why are they even do MultiLoader? And then you finally find a solution, it's like, this is great. And then finally referencing loader specific code, which we do through services mainly, that's what we usually suggest, where it uses the Java service loader API to construct classes into fields, basically. So we have public static final platform helper platform equals like service.load. So it's a public static final, but depending on what platform you're on, will have a different version. So you don't need to make it fake final to like make sure no one else touches your stuff. Although reflection, mixin, we try and be good coders, but the environment is the environment. So there are other solutions to this type of setup, namely the CraftTweaker API based abstraction, which is the name I came up with today. Basically, in previous versions of CraftTweaker, we had CraftTweaker-112-API, and it did not have access to Minecraft at all. So if you had something that returned an item stack, it returns an object, and you now need to cast that to item stack in your code, in the code that can reference Minecraft. That was primarily used for cross-version though, not necessarily cross-platform, because back then platforms didn't exist. Thankfully we phased the system out because it was horrible. but it is still something that you can do, and like, not sure how far you go, but that's a solution. Then the replay mode preprocessor, I used it for a project for a few months. As you can see, it is interesting. I've honestly thought about using it again because it could make things quite a bit easier, but the general idea is use comments to dictate what happens when it's compiled. So if it's compiling for MC 112.0, in this case 112.2, it'll put that code. Otherwise, it's going to put the code for below 112. The issue, it did have some RD integration issues, but I mean, it did work pretty well. It's just very, I'm going to say, ugly, and takes a bit to get used to.
And then also a lot of people like to use architecture. We personally didn't like going that route just because architecture has a lot of custom code. Whether that be the custom Gradle plugins they use or the non-necessary API that they use to help glue the different loader environments together. So one of the main skepticisms we've heard about of when people hear about multiloader is how much mod code can actually be put in the common module. And mod loaders do a lot of work, and so it seems pretty natural to think that there'd be lots of platform-specific code. So I've been tracking a bunch of multi-loader mods on GitHub, and so we ran 108 mods from GitHub. There's more, but those are just the main ones, and like the main ones at the time of collecting the data. And combined, they had over 402,000 lines of code. The majority of that code was common at 343,000. We should have kept the percentages in here, but it's about 85%.
84%, yeah.
Yeah, and then Forge had 35,000 lines, and Fabric had 23,000. So about 4 and 8%. And quite a few notable mods have actually switched to multiloader already. So a few examples are Oh the Biomes You'll Go, Botania, and Patchouli. Basically everything Young Nick's making, so like Young Nick's better dungeons, better strongholds, all of that stuff, and Cooking for Blockheads.
Just to give some those percentages, Common was 85.3%, Fabric was 5.9%, and Forge was 8.7%. And also, all of the stats is from a few months ago. There are quite a few mods not included that have recently been.
Actually, no, I gave you the most updated stats before we went live.
These stats were from today. This is everything there is besides the JERPR porting it to MultiLoader to support Fabric. That's currently not sure what Mez is while it's waiting for, but hopefully before JR119 comes, it's going to have a Fabric port using MultiLoader as well. So yeah, that's MultiLoader Madness. How do you do questions?
Press the button in the corner near dark. Yeah, there you go. If you all want to ask questions, grab a book, write your question, sign it, and throw it into the hopper. Try to keep them short, though, because they won't fit on the screen.
So the questions will come up on the slide screen in front of us.
Yeah, they'll take a second because we had to use create to get them there.
I see. Okay, it looks like we have some questions coming through.
Okay, so do I click the green button to get on screen or?
Yep.
Okay, will there be a way to make a MultiLoader mod in the MC Dev IntelliJ plugin? So for those who don't know, MC Dev IntelliJ plugin is a plugin that just helps with Minecraft development, be it copy, like mix in target references, or I believe it can make templates, so you don't need to go and clone Fabric example mod or download Forge MDK.
Yeah.
You can just make a new project, select what you want. So it's not something you necessarily looked into. I don't know if it's something I'd be interested in.
So while we're waiting for everyone, I don't know if that next question was meant for us, Jared.
Yeah, I was going to ignore it.
Okay.
Okay, I think everyone's here, really. So let's go on. So yeah, basically MTDev can make a project for you with, you give it mod name, version. Last time I used it, I asked for an MCP name for mappings. I don't know if it still does. I'll be honest, my experience with it is just not working, but I'm sure it's up, being improved. So it's something we could definitely look into. Just right now, there hasn't really been a demand for it. So yeah, that's it, really.
Do you want me to clear up these questions, or?
Yeah. So I'll go through them, but you can clear them up. So what's the most difficult feature when making MultiLoader? Really just the different ways you can do things in Gradle and figuring out what's best. Because you could just make a task to literally copy paste the common code into Fabric code before compiling. And it's like, is that the right way to do it? Probably not. And also just dealing with how different tools deal with it. Being Forge Gradle does not support implementing a library. A library is where the Forge Gradle decides is a library. In our case, common source set was a library. So what we had to do was common code in Forge project is in compiler only. using compiled Java to actually copy the code in. But in Fabric, it's just implementation, and I think we still have the code pulling in because it's basically just shadowing the code in, but it's just a bit of a different implementation detail. I don't really see how this could happen unless.
So I
Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say I kind of have an example of this to an extent. So you know how so mods are moving to data packs for a lot of things, and Forge has like a recipe conditions feature where you can like load a recipe only if another mod is loaded, and then Fabric they added their system, but it works completely differently, and so you can't really abstract that away. And then I don't know if Quilt has a solution to that yet.
Yeah, really, I think you should decide what you actually want to support. Because something where I could see this being an issue, with MultiLoader you can support any project type you want. So you can take Forge and Fabric out, take Forge and Fabric out and put Sponge, Purple, I don't know, my server plugin loaders, whatever server plugin loaders you want to use, you can just convert to a server only template. So in the case of, you can't just throw Sponge templates into MultiLoader because how are you going to register blocks, all of that. You really have to decide what you want to do. And in the worst case, your mod doesn't need to be a one-to-one port. If you need to add a block only on Forge, you can do that. Like, nothing is stopping you from having 10,000 Forge lines. But just doing everything the same and knowing that it's the same is pretty useful.
So yeah, I guess the summary of that is if the feature doesn't exist, you have to decide if you actually want to implement that, and then if the answer is yeah, you do need that thing, then usually you have to build it yourself. So with the example I was giving earlier with recipes, I just ended up making my own system for that in Bookshelf. And there's been a few situations like Forge has an expanded ingredient system, and Jared and I made a library for adding our own ingredients on Fabric. And it'll probably get a Quilt version 2 eventually if it needs one.
Yeah, if it needs one, we'll do it. And this one we're gonna read from the screen first because it's a bit long. Don't think it's going to fit on. Why modder get angry when they try to port their mods or try a MultiLoader project with them? Bad English lol. Anonymous. Modders get angry at anything and everything. I'm surprised, like, we can't control what mods get angry at. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it can be annoying when you spend a lot of time making making a system and then Mojang releases an update the next day or like a few weeks later and you have to start from scratch again. But I found that now that we're moving to MoMaps, or however you like to pronounce that, it's the 1.19 update was actually not that bad for me. And I attribute a lot of that to using Moj Maps now. Because like previously, a lot of the issues we would have with boarding is if changes happen to the community made maps. Because sometimes like MCP would lose track of a class and it would get a new name. Or method names would be tweaked and then you'd have to like go find them. And of course, like the worst case scenario is like an MCP name would get renamed from like one name to another name, and then that name would happen to overlap with something that had previous meaning. And then you have like weird edge case bugs where a different method than you originally thought was being called. So, yeah, basically it just means a lot of extra work is happening. Like a lot of extra work the modder has to do. And it can just be annoying to deal with.
Yeah, at the end of the day, MultiLoader isn't meant to be a saving grace for mods to support multiple versions. It's meant for the modders who are going to have a Fabric or Forge port of their mod anyway. Like, if you don't care about the other loader and just want to make your user base happy, don't use MultiLoader. Like, you need to actually want to support that loader and not give up when you realize that it's not as easy as just a new item in your mod initialization on initialize method. And you actually have to deal with whatever Forge does for registering items. And yeah, are there any other questions?
If anyone has any further questions, get it on a book and throw it in. Oh, that's it. You've got one on its way.
Yeah, if we answered your question wrong, feel free to rephrase it in the chat or something.
Okay, so can you use yarn on MultiLoader? So I've seen a few people ask for this. At the end of the day, I've never used yarn. I've only used MCP and March maps, and I rarely like my March maps. So it's not something that I'm necessarily interested in pursuing. Saying that, I do know of some of the issues that you may run into with doing it. So if anyone wanted to do it,
I have an answer to that question. If you use Architecture Loom, it automatically remaps Yarn and other mapping sets to Forge, which uses Moj maps, I believe.
that's a solution. I mean, at the end of the day, we have no, I wouldn't say proprietary code, even though it would be open source anyway. So firstly, here's a link to the GitHub, because I just realized, can you not click that link?
That's
Okay, well, if
Want
you
me to
feel
set
like
up a link
checking
block?
out, okay, that would be nice. So, yeah, so yes, you can use Archloom to do that, but then you're stuck with Archloom. Nothing against it, never used it, but just another dependency that you make sure is updated and works.
I did it.
Oh.
And so, but for a, I'm going to say MultiLoader native yarn solution, Vanilla Gradle right now only supports Mudge maps. I believe there's support for yarn in a PR or it's being talked about, but as it stands, Vanilla Gradle only supports Mudge maps right now. Saying that, you can swap out Vanilla Gradle for Loom and potentially have some performance improvements. This is just third-party information I've been told, but apparently Loom in the same overall project shares some resources. I don't know which resources. It's not something I've looked into because Vanilla Gradle works. So yeah, so that could get you yarn on common and then yarn on fabric, obviously. As for Forge, I know that there's been a project called Yarn over MCP, something along those lines, which could potentially give a base to just do yarn over yarn, yarn over nothing, to just generate yarn mappings in the format that Forge wants them to be in, and that could potentially work. I'm really not. It's not something I've looked into, not something I really want to waste my time on. But the project is open source branch, which we need update for 1.19, where if someone did make a yarn version of MultiLoader, we'll happily have it there for others to clone and use. And yeah.
Yeah, I guess like the main summary is that it's possible, but it's a lot of effort, and motion maps just work so well that there isn't really a whole lot of incentive, at least from our point of view, to developing those tools further. But if the community wanted to make PRs and stuff, or new branches.
So yeah, that's it. I believe we have the stage for another 20 or so minutes. So,
You do? I think I saw someone submit a question just there as well.
Oh, okay, well, what I'm suggesting is opening up question. Oh, wait, okay. Okay,
Yeah, you can do a
so
hot mic if you
kotlin
want.
MultiLoader. This is another one of those, it's not something we use, not something you have experience with, but Sammy from... No, not Sammy, sorry, getting people confused. Petra from Hexcasting she ported Hexcasting and Porkle, her library mod, I believe, to MultiLoader, and I believe it uses some Kotlin code. She has had quite a few issues though, as well say, but I believe it's working. It just now of figuring out the right Gradle, and like I think you need to use like compile Kotlin instead of compile Java. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just really not something I have interest in and any experience in.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe one of the strong suits of MultiLoader is that you don't necessarily need to fork it. Like, it's just a template where we have like a GitHub project that has it set up. So it's like a pre-configured MDK, basically. And a lot of people usually do make custom tweaks to it. Like the version of MultiLoader I'm running in all of my mods is slightly tweaked from the version on GitHub. And the Violet Moon team, who works on Botania and Patchouli and a few other mods, they have like a slightly different system. Like it's still technically MultiLoader, but they have their own custom system where
I believe they renamed Common to XPlat.
Yeah.
Or cross-platform.
Yeah, and a lot of mods will make like little tweaks here and there to better suit their needs.
Yeah, for example, JR has a very different approach. It's still MultiLoader based, but there's like Forge API, Core API projects, just to get like full code splitting.
Yeah, and I mean, Jared uses a Kotlin-based build script, I think, right?
Yeah, build.gradle.kts, because it's so much better than Groovy.
Yeah,
But
and we keep
yeah.
Groovy as the default on GitHub because that's what most people are familiar with. But
yeah, we try and make it as unopinionated as possible. So that's why it's like vanilla Gradle. We aren't choosing Loom over when we have a solution that's, I'm gonna say, I've forgotten the word. It's not Forge, it's not Fabric. Forge people can't complain you're using Fabric too much. Fabric people can't complain you're using Forge too much. Any of that. Just third party to everyone.
So I think Olivia asked an interesting question in chat about the hard client server split with Fabric.
Yeah.
And
So yeah.
no, you can continue if you have something
Okay.
to say.
So Forge doesn't have that, I don't believe, right now. I'm not sure what you can do. Neither does. Let me actually just.
So while Jared looks into that, I mean, ultimately it's pretty easy to simulate something like that. You just have different source sets. Like at the end of the day, MultiLoader is based on different build modules. So you could split Fabric up into Fabric Comment or Fabric Client, Fabric Server, stuff like that. In one of my projects, I'm in Dark Paintings, which has a booth somewhere on the server. So there's another mod called Paintings Plus Plus, and they have a system for adding new paintings. And so something I've been trying to do, so their system is like you can make a resource pack that adds new paintings, and I'm basically using a separate build module in MultiLoader to build the resource pack for their mod spec. So it's really flexible. You can make like whatever absurd little niche project you need to be.
Yeah. So just with the initial question though, we aren't going to support something that isn't supported by the tools themselves. So something that is actually being quite nice, but can see it as a bit of a maybe a reason not to use MultiLoader, I don't know. There is very little that could go wrong that's actually MultiLoader's fault. So for example, someone complained about running the building with idea. So you can choose between building with Gradle versus building with idea, and building with idea wasn't working. And they hadn't ran into this before, and the unfortunate answer is that there's nothing, it's not our template, because it doesn't work on Forge. Like, it's actually just a bug in Forge. So you still have to deal with the Forge like Forge Gradle issues and their team to get it fixed. And just with that question, I mentioned earlier being able to make a plugin based MultiLoader or MultiLoader based plugin template where you can use like Sponge and Cauldron, Bucket, showing my age with server plugins here. Like just have a server only template. So you could use the Fabric server only component for that. But as like I said, just make sure you don't reference that code, like split your code up, make sure you don't reference code from another project, from another side, being server side versus client side. Unfortunately, you wouldn't get the benefits of just downloading the server components instead of downloading the whole game. But yeah, that's just a limitation of the tools. So yeah, I think there's nothing else then. I think this may be it.
Yeah, I mean, we can also, since we have some time, unless there's something anyone else wants to do, we can open up for non-multi-loader questions, if anyone has those as well.
Yeah, if there's anything you just want to ask us as modders and let's MultiLoader, ask us. Okay. How do you consistently get good ideas for mods? You don't. I haven't released a mod in like a mod that isn't just an add-on for Craft Weaker or something else like that in years. I don't know what I was doing in 2015, 2016, but I released my best mods in those years, and I've just gone downhill from there.
I guess I'm the exact opposite. I have like a notepad with hundreds of ideas and Trello board and way too many ideas all the time. Whether or not they're good ideas, I guess that's for you guys to decide. But I do find a good place for getting ideas is reading r/Minecraft suggestions. It's really interesting to see how a lot of players will interpret the vanilla feedback, or like their feedback for the vanilla game. And like there's a lot of interesting takeaways for mod authors there as well.
Just with that, because it's something that I know a lot of modders deal with. It doesn't matter if another mod does the same thing as your mod, as long as your mod isn't a complete ripoff with no actual reason to be a ripoff. I mean, if there's a mod that adds blue blocks, then that's the whole thing, and you decide, that's a neat idea, let me add blue blocks as well, and just like 2 mods that add blue blocks. That, depending on who you ask, it could be seen as a bit weird, but I mean, if you ever look on the subreddit and it's like, what mod adds this? And it's like Quark. Quark adds so much stuff that just, you wouldn't be able to make a mod if you're like, oh, I don't want to add this because Quark does it. Because there's just so much stuff. Okay. Would we be interested in developing a MultiLoader plugin for IntelliJ? I don't see what it would do, because the MTDev plugin, like, all you really need is copy, mix, and target reference, and I've forgotten what else it does, to be honest. But I don't really know what would do in this case. Can you, like, what do you think it should do? So there could be some mobility links, since like, so one of the things I guess you didn't really mention as one of the weak points of this, you have the Minecraft source at least 3 times. If you look up the item class, you're going to see it 3 times, and you need to see if it's like which one you actually want to see, because sometimes you do want to see the forge patches, see what they do, and all of that. And also any search you do, you can get 3 times the results. So I could see some, maybe a right click, go to forge implementation, go to fabric implementation, something like that. Could be useful. Not something I think I want to spend dev time in right now, but it could definitely be a useful tool for people.
Okay, and I'll ask Olivia's question since they put it in chat. What is your favorite mods, Jared?
The ones I haven't released.
I think they meant like other people's mods.
Ooh, that's hard. The unfortunate thing is that I haven't really played Minecraft in so long. Like, it's just isn't something I've really had motivation to do, unfortunately.
Excuse me, have you not gone around and looked at the booths?
You can check the server logs. I joined like yesterday to make sure everything was working.
Oh, sounds like you got something to fix then.
Yeah, no, hex casting looks very neat, and I'm jealous because it's doing rendering, and I really like rendering, but I don't have a mod to do any rendering in. Like all my mods are just backend mods that no one really knows.
So I do have a mod that I'm kind of in the same boat as Jared. Like I don't play Minecraft that much. There's a lot of cool mods on the server though, like especially the snail one. But outside of that, I actually really like the looter mod. They add basically they make loot chests player specific. So if two players find the same dungeon or the same stronghold, same chest, and whatever, they can, and it works with a bunch of structures. They can access the same loot chest and get different loot pools. And like one of the big downsides is you go on a server and usually if you're not first on the server, everything's explored and there's like nothing to really find in the world. And I find that Looter solves that in a pretty interesting way.
There is a bit of lag, but
Yeah, we
overall
have another
not much.
question.
You know, I'm gonna
Do you
just
believe that Fabric
gonna
is
set myself to
mainly the
push the
home of
talk now.
quality of life mods? Not particularly. I mean, a lot of my mods are quality of life, and they only got updated or ported Fabric late last year. I feel they probably start out with a lot of those small mods because, like, I don't really think Fabric start with the compatibility layers that Forge has. I mean, like capability system and all of that to make sure that you can insert an item into this block from another mod. So yeah, I feel Fabric is definitely great. I mean, look at what's on the server now. But I think it definitely started off. I mean, first Fabric mod I ported was controlling. So yeah.
Yeah, I think a big part of this is also just how disproportionate quality of life mods are in the community. There's just so many of them for every little aspect of the game. Meanwhile, like content mods take a lot of work to make the textures and models and all of that stuff. But I actually think that Fabric got a pretty bad rap with the quality of life thing because some of the first mods I remember seeing out of Fabric, I don't remember his name. He used to do a YouTube series where he would make new mod video showcases every week of like all the new Fabric mods. And there was all types of content mods, like different biomes and like different types of mobs and stuff. And I remember actually saying to Jared at the time that I was surprised at just how it's hard to put into words, but like how creative and inspired the Fabric mods seemed to be in terms of content. Like at the time, a lot of Forge mods were feeling kind of like repetitive. We were seeing the same ideas get rehashed, and it seemed like Fabric was actually having kind of a renaissance of content mods at the time. So
And then I
yeah,
think our last question here, just gonna react since it's a bit long. Do you think modders should focus on making small mods with different features, or make bigger mods with features that interact with each other? So personally, I feel you have to kind of like weigh up what's right for a mod. So it wouldn't make sense, in my opinion, for say, so I have a mod that lets slimes pick up items and like it renders the item on their head, and when you kill them, you can like get back. And I've had people asking me to make like where a slime picks up a TNT, they turn into a TNT slime, and when you kill them, it explodes. Or like a lava slime, fire slime, anything like that. And it's like, it's not really the point of the mod, it's just to like add that absorption effect to slimes. And like, I feel it would be out of place personally to add any features like that.
yeah. I like Jared said, I think it really depends on the type of mod because so I don't know how many players have noticed, but if you hover over an enchanted book right now in the game, there'll be a description over the book explaining what the enchantment does. And that's a feature added by my mod Enchantment Descriptions. But that mod actually used to be part of Wayla, or What Are We Looking At? And and the issue with Wayla is like it was a big mod. Certain packs would do the one probe or like different versions of it, and so having that feature in Wayla meant that a lot of players actually couldn't get access to it. And so I actually had a lot of people ask at the time if I could make it as a standalone feature. And so I kind of feel like to an extent, the community kind of moves towards small, granular mods that ultimately allow players to have the most compatible experience and like mix and match all the different mods they want. But at the same time, when you get into content mods, imagine like releasing Botania up as like 100 different mods for each flower. That would be a bit much. So I think there's definitely a balance, and it really depends on the type of features and how granular you want to help the community with your stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest making mute sound muter enderman, sound muter zombie, sound muter eating, etc. for all the sounds in the game. Like, I just have a sound muter. And yeah, I think we're getting kicked off stage right here by G-Dude, so...
Sorry, guys. Yeah, we're running a bit over time, I'm afraid. Thanks for that, though. You did great.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, guys.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. The next event is just in a few minutes. It is Petra's hex casting talk. I believe it's about how to make interesting mods, something like that. I'm going to set up the slides and stuff. Will be just a few minutes.